Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining and welcome back to Wall Street Silver. Joining us today is the green chicken. That chicken is Doomberg. Doomberg, how are you doing today, sir?
Doing great, Ivan. How are you doing?
Doing awesome. It's a pleasure to have a green chicken on the channel, so we're
Uh,
excited.
it's great to be on with you and Jim. Jim and I were speaking before we started recording that this has been a work in progress for several weeks, and it's great to finally be able to sit down with you guys and talk
Nice.
magnesium.
Yeah, so Doomberg, you has made a name for himself on Twitter and on Substack for some great long form writing that he does, and a lot of the audience in precious metals may not know him. Some of you may, because he has. What are you up to now on Twitter? Like 23,000 followers on Twitter, and
Nice.
most of your articles get what 50,000 reads these days.
Yeah, we're about 23,000, as you said, on Twitter, and we are just over 18,000 and change on Substack. So very good conversion from Twitter to Substack, which is a number we care a lot about. And then, yeah, our most recent pieces, the ones in December, are averaging over 50,000 views each, which is really
Wow.
amazing. And
Yeah.
like observing your growth, I haven't been a fan of your show from the beginning. It's really cool to see you guys grow as fast as you have, and support all other content creators that we can. And so congratulations to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, hey, I want to share the reason we asked you on is your most recent article. And it's a great title. This is your Twitter account. If anyone wants to follow Doomberg on Twitter, it's at DoombergT, and the link will be in the description. But you wrote a great article about magnesium recently, and just a brilliant title, Magnesium PI. For those, I mean, most people probably don't know this show, but me at my age, I do remember it.
It's on target for our demographic, I can assure you.
Yeah, on target for our
Yeah.
Gen X demographic, I guess, guy
Yeah.
demographic.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's magnesium, and this links to silver because they're these are key industrial metals, and you want to start off and give the basis of why you decided to write this article, Doomberg?
You bet. So the reason we decided to write this article, and it's one of several across a similar theme, which is really how the energy crisis that started in Europe, the natural gas crisis and electricity crisis in Europe, has spread to China. And because of decades of effectively allowing China to take over the production of certain critical raw materials that are at the sort of very front end of the global economy, we find ourselves in a situation where China has dominant share in the production of these critical inputs, one of them being magnesium. And because of that, they control the world's economic destiny. So, and magnesium, like many of these front-end inputs, are incredibly energy intense to produce. And because of that, China has decided that it is among the targeted processes in their country that they have put a slow down on, or a stop to in some cases, their production, because China is suffering an energy crisis that started in Europe. And so we had done an earlier piece on polysilicon, which is a key input into the solar industry. Polysilicon is also incredibly energy intense. China flooded the market with cheap polysilicon, put Western producers out of business.
Wow.
Over the past 10 to 15 years. They own a dominant share in the production of that material. And when the energy crisis arrived in China, China shut down, at least temporarily, or restrained the production of polysilicon, and the price of polysilicon skyrocketed. Now that has pretty limited consequences contained to predominantly the renewable energy sector. But for a material like magnesium, you're really talking about shut down the entire global economy potential if China had maintained its restraints on production.
How did China get to this point? You start your article explaining an event that happened in 1998.
Yeah. Why don't I walk through a bit of the history? So, because of its importance to the military, the U.S. Became a real dominant producer of magnesium, especially during World War II. And the Dow Chemical Company, in fact, had built a very large magnesium facility in the Gulf Coast Gulf of Mexico, in their Freeport, their giant petrochemical facility in Freeport. And in 1998, even by then, the U.S. had begun to be sort of less and less of a player. The Chinese were starting to ramp up. And then a tropical storm hit the Gulf Coast and flooded out Dow's plant. And as we described in the article, Dow was already struggling with, increased competition, low profitability, and also significant reinvestment needs that they kind of threw in the towel. And if you go back to that chart that you showed of China's dominance, we put the arrow in the chart where that tropical storm flooded out Dow's facility. Dow closed that plant, and then China just started building out magnesium production like crazy. And in part because they used a slightly different process to produce it that relied on ready access to cheap coal. And this is a continuing theme in all of these energy intense industries. China decided that it wanted to basically dominate the production of these critical materials. And the manner in which they were able to do that was they subsidized their production by artificially cheap coal. And so you see this across many industries. And this shutdown of the Dow facility sort of marked the end of the US dominance in this space. And it occurred just as you described, Jim, just as the lightweighting megatrend in the auto industry exploded. And the reason why lightweighting is so important in the auto industry is because of fuel standards. And so you have this trend of the need to reduce carbon emissions from our transportation sector, driving substantial lightweighting efforts in the automotive industry, which drives substantial substitution of steel with lightweight aluminum alloys, which require magnesium. And now here we are in 2021 with the energy crisis in Europe snapping through our delicate supply chains like a whip, showing up in China, and then causing this amazing spike in the price of aluminum, which we also showed in the article, which we see so many charts like this that basically any energy intense input is undergoing this incredible price inflation. And then we discussed what the inevitable consequences have to be, which is these are critical raw materials. Yeah, there we go. This is the price of magnesium in China, from 2000 to 10,000. And it's come off the lows now, but it's still 3.5 times the price it was just earlier in 2021, late 2020.
Well, this trend, I mean, there was a spike here, but if you just ignore that spike, the trend is still pretty obvious right there.
So if you correlate it with European natural gas price, you'll see a pretty strong correlation. And so this is when you started to see coal companies in Australia coming off the bottom because the demand for coal was starting to grow. So one of the main points that we end the piece with is that these are going to ripple down supply chains and cause inflationary pressures in ways that people can't even begin to think about. And considering where the CPI is today, however much you think the CPI accurately measures inflation, there's no questioning that even by the conservative measure of the U.S. government, CPI is at a 30-40-year high. And that's before the full consequence of these energy crises find their way through the value chain.
So Doomberg, is there any solution here long-term, or is this we just got to suck it up and live with it?
Well, it's interesting that you talked about time frame, because I would say if you divide the time frame between short-term and long-term, there's not very much we can do short-term except hope that China restarts magnesium production in full capacity and works to bring these prices down. There's another factor that we haven't discussed here, and we didn't address it in the article, which is the upcoming Olympics in China as well. And predating such big international events, the Chinese often will restrict energy-intense industries in an effort to affect the quality of the air and give the appearance of a clean environment when all of these international athletes and dignitaries are coming into the country. And that is compounding this situation, I'm sure. So even though the price of magnesium has come down, it's still very, very elevated, and there's still not enough magnesium production to meet global demand. And we're seeing car companies warning of such consequences during their earnings calls. Now, in the short term, I really don't think there's much we can do, but we do end the article with a call to action for the long term. There are certain things that the West, North America, Europe, there are certain things that we should make that are difficult to make, costly to make, and they come with environmental challenges that we know how to solve. But the real problem here and how this happens is the Chinese have minimal environmental standards compared to trying to operate a facility here in the US, and they compete on price. And if your competitors aren't held to the same environmental standards that you are, then you can't compete. And so we have to find a way to determine as a society that certain critical raw materials are necessary to be produced domestically for national security and economic security. And we've allowed far too many of these to be totally devastated without consequence. You know, anti-dumping tariffs have been ineffective. We go over in the piece about how Norway shut down their magnesium and France shut down their magnesium and the Canadians shut down their magnesium. And suddenly you have 85% of this globally critical commodity being made with questionable environmental standards and low-grade coal by people who don't like us very much.
Yeah. As you said, there's certain materials that we must have for domestic security, and we should never allow China to have 90% of any market. I think the same thing is true for rare earth metals. Even though most people don't know that rare earth metals are not rare, they're just China has just done the same thing as they did with aluminum. They're producing them so cheaply in China that it's not profitable for anyone else to. And it's not just where the materials are located to be mined. The smelters, all the technology, all the industrial infrastructure to process the raw ore and to turn it into finished metals, all that's located in China. So even if they don't have the ore in China and it's mined in Africa or South America or wherever, that ore all has to be shipped to China for most of these metals in order to be processed. Is that, I mean, have you found that also, Doomberg?
Yeah, it depends on the metal, and there are still some legacy smelters, for example, in Europe and in North America. But a very smart reader has been going back and forth and was the inspiration to write this piece, pointed out to me that 3 zinc smelters in Europe have either been shut down or idled to 50% capacity because of the spiking cost of natural gas. And he was encouraging me to think about writing a piece on zinc, which we might do. But if you go back to that one facility, Jim, that you said it accurately and that we described in the piece is still operating in the US. That facility has been targeted by environmentalists for shutdown for decades. And I mean, some of it is deserved. You know, there's been some pretty serious accusations of environmental pollution from that facility, and there's been some worker safety incidents. These are hard facilities to run. They're certainly hard to run at a profit when you're competing against the Chinese, who hold themselves to different standards.
So effectively, all we're doing is we're outsourcing our CO2 emissions and our pollution to China. We're just moving it elsewhere, pretending it's like you sweep it under the rug. Yeah. But now we're out of the control of our own supply chain. We're forced to deal with the China issue. But how does this all tie into silver from an industrial perspective? I mean, what have your thoughts been on that?
So there's a couple of effects that we could talk about. One that should sort of put a bid under the price of silver because of inflationary pressures, and then another potential that might dampen the demand for silver because of the impacts on solar and how much silver is used in the solar industry. But let's tackle the first one. You know, magnesium, as we said in this piece, is not only used to make aluminum alloys, but also for high-strength steel and titanium. And there's many products that require magnesium in order to make. And the most direct way that we see this potentially impacting the silver market is, you know, silver, as you say, is a hybrid. It's an industrial metal, and it's also money. And so unlike gold, the price of silver does have some sensitivity to inflationary pressures at the mines. And to the extent that the combination of the energy crisis in Europe and in China driving inputs across the entirety of what a miner would need to successfully run their operation. You know, these are big tractors, big trucks, diesel. The price of diesel is going up in Europe because of it's being burned to make electricity and all this other stuff. And so if we see these, you know, if you think the CPI is 6 or 7, and the real inflation at a mine is 10, 12, or 15, you could see the cost of producing silver go much higher, which you would think would lend support to a higher silver price than what we see today. On the flip side, one of the main industrial uses for silver is, of course, in the production of solar panels, which is another little detail that many people don't realize. And if this spike in polysilicon prices doesn't dissipate back to more historically normal levels, we could see demand for solar actually decrease in the years ahead. For example, 2021 is the first year in several that the cost of solar is actually going up,
Really?
as opposed to the sort of steady decline in, dollars per watt installed that we had seen over the decades, and that many environmentalists had assumed would continue to become cheaper over time, which is the basis for which they believe that we could adopt this more widely across society. So to the extent that solar is impeded by the energy crisis, it could lower demand for silver. And it's hard to say how those flows will wash each other out.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize we mine approximately 800 million ounces per year of silver globally, all the mines combined. And about 10% of that is used in the solar industry, about 80 million ounces.
Yeah.
Those are approximate numbers. It changes every year, of course. But 10% of silver consumption.
But the growth projections, though, the growth projections are really where if as a silver enthusiast, the growth projections of solar are very bullish for you. And so if solar doubles or triples every 2 years, then that 80 becomes 160, becomes 240. That's where you see the support for the price of silver. And so to the extent that this energy crisis in Europe that spread to China bends that curve down a bit, then it could really sort of affect the out years of silver demand in a way that might even offset the inflationary pressures that we see at the mines.
I hear you. Well, Doomberg, this has been a great discussion. I'm a big fan of your work online. I'll put a link to the article in the description of this video so more people can find it more easily if they're not on Twitter, where you normally post these things. And, thank you for coming on. And as you have more articles in the future that sort of loosely connect to our own subject here on Wall Street Silver, we'd love to have you back to talk about more of your future work.
You bet. And Ivan and Jim, it's been great. Huge fans of the show, and a thrill to be on with you. And when we do write a precious metal piece, I know the first person I'm going to reach out to, and that would be you, Jim, on Twitter.
Well, you are by far our favorite chicken. I just want you to know that.
You got to make him animated. You got to make him animated.
Yeah, we need an animated chicken like cucking and walking across the screen.
It's on the list for 2022.
That'd be good.
Thanks, you much. Guys.